So welcome to our second panel of the day. We're going to be focusing on thoughtful communication and design. The first panel was really exciting. We had some good questions coming in, and it was all about prop tech and consumer engagement. And we'll continue that conversation as well as the conversation we have here in our working group discussion next in the next session starting at 2:30. It'll be more of a meeting style, so you'll all have the opportunity to turn on your mics and cameras. So today we're going to discuss the opportunities to support livability and attainability by design and communicate more effectively with today's audience, taking demographic and societal changes into account as we determine what to say and how to say it. When you're asking questions to our panelists, make sure that you actually choose to panelists and attendees or to everyone, however it appears in your chat box. And that way we have other people sharing their insights and more of a engaging conversation happening. I want to take a moment to thank all of our partners, one of which is a facilitator today, Ashley at Rise. Thank you for helping us do all that we do at the Alliance. And with that, I will hand it over to Ashley Abernethy, who is the VP of Growth and Partnerships at Rise. Take it away.
Thank you, Natalie, and thank you to everyone over at the Alliance for all of the wonderful work that you guys are doing and bringing us all together today. As Natalie mentioned, I'm Ashley Abernethy. I'm the VP of Growth and Partnerships over at Rise. And for those that may not be familiar, Rise is an online home improvement store, basically where you can find carefully vetted, sustainable products that benefit your health, your wealth, and the planet. Behind all these products on the store, there is a ton of education. We've had millions of homeowners actually come and visit Rise to learn how to make their homes more sustainable. And we also offer online continuing education for residential building professionals and real estate agents. But today it's not about Rise. We're here to talk about the opportunities to support livability and sustainability by design and how to talk to the consumer in ways that are clear, direct, and meaningful. And I'm so excited to introduce today's panel, Meg and Rhea. So just a little bit about each of them. Meg is the founder of Voyage, which brings fresh perspectives to real estate development marketing. So Voyage works with real estate developers, new developments, and prop tech companies to build, implement, and execute marketing and branding strategies as an extension of the leadership team. And Rhea is an associate principal at Hickok and the director of Hickok Lifestyle, the firm's award-winning boutique interior studio focused on crafting compelling residential, hospitality, and retail environments. So you guys are in for a treat today. But before we dig into the questions for these two lovely humans, we're asking each of our experts to provide just a snapshot of their approach to driving innovation. So Meg, can you go ahead and get us started?
Absolutely. Thank you, Ashley. I'm so excited to be a part of this discussion with you, Rhea, and the Housing Innovation Alliance team. So I'll dive into my part of the discussion. And really, I want to preface it by saying the place that we call home is one of the most used products in the world. It was before, but it really is even more so over the last 18 months. I'm sitting in my home right now. So, I'm going to frame my discussion around 4 key points, and I'll just, go over those quickly and then dive in so you understand where I'm heading with this. I'm going to start with a 30,000-foot view and say, okay, how do developers, developments, prop tech offerings, how does everyone work together and how do we communicate that? And once we've gone through that 30,000-foot view, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the language of technology and how that is combined with the language of real estate. How do we build the bridge to bring those two things together? And third, it's going to get a bit more fun. A lot of my experience prior to starting Voyage was in the ultra luxury sector, New York, San Francisco, absurdly high price points. But what are those lessons that I learned there, and how are we able to bring those to all people, not just necessarily the ultra wealthy? And then the fourth is, also fun. It's thinking about developers and developments as just being good neighbors rather than gentrifying. So I'm finish by discussing that. So, to begin, just when it comes to technology, even I, as an industry expert, I feel like there are an overwhelming amount of offerings out there. Some seem excessively complicated. I believe that good technology is simple and intuitive. It is easy to use. It is not overcomplicated, at least on the consumer facing side. And technology can empower creativity. It can allow stakeholders to make decisions faster. I think the idea of who key stakeholders are when it comes to real estate development are starting to evolve. I think community is much more focused. I'll talk a little bit about placemaking and placekeeping and the difference between those. And really, if we make decisions faster and more efficiently, we can create better places for people in a few ways. Way number one that I think about is how do we reduce time-consuming iterative processes? We can use artificial intelligence. We can use machine learning. They are not the same thing. Artificial intelligence is essentially something is fully baked and can iterate on its own, but machine learning is you have inputs and the machine gets smarter and smarter by responding to your feedback. And the way in which I think that's executed when it comes to real estate product, which is developments, is really generative design. It can be used in the early planning stages, and it can allow you to consider all of your options in real time rather than waiting weeks to iterate upon a design. So that's one idea. Technology can enable better communication. One of the challenges that I've had with my developers and with my clients is we're not in the same place. It's harder to travel. So with stakeholder groups located in different places, you can start to use technology to collaborate, to collate comments, to get through approvals. And I think with community engagement, it's been especially helpful because instead of just showing a group of community stakeholders an Excel spreadsheet and saying this can't work, we can now say, this is how this can work. This is how many people we need to go through this place in order to have a new bus line or to have this amount of businesses and so forth. I think taking it to the consumer side of businesses, it can make building systems more efficient, lighting, temperature control, water usage. There's this phrase, the Internet of Things, but it's as simple as a TV is an Internet of Things product. And, finally, for construction, it can identify better, more sustainable building materials. But for, finally, really on a global level, we're looking to what other places and other countries are doing right now. So, one thing I will, say is a key takeaway from this idea of prop tech is early adopters do have a steeper learning curve. You are doing something for the first time. It does take more effort and a little bit of, trial and error, but you will always emerge ahead of your peers. And I think the user journey and ultimately the customer experience becomes more thoughtful because you were able to plan early on. Moving to the second point, how do we bring the language of technology and real estate together for our customers? Really, these are our friends, the people we interact with every day. If they are lucky enough to, they have places to call home. And when we think about marketing communications, I always think about simplicity first. How do we make our messaging so simple so that a broker or a buyer or a renter can go and convey that information to the other decision makers in their group? And I think part of that is also realizing today what social platforms work. Facebook is a slightly older demographic, but it's excellent for community engagement. Instagram reaches far more consumers that have an incredible amount of purchasing power. Snapchat and TikTok, I'll admit I'm still learning it, but it is very much the voice of Gen Z. So I'm forcing myself to engage with those platforms a bit more so that I can understand how they're being used when it comes to real estate product. I think customer journeys and messaging maps are something we would kind of create around marketing collateral. We design the collateral first and then we'd figure out what the journey was. But I think now we're starting to go, what is the journey? What is the messaging? Who are the stakeholders? And one of my favorite things to talk about these days are chatbots. Or about 18 months ago, everybody was using them, but very few people were using them well. You would go to a website and you would immediately get served a chatbot, but you didn't even know if you wanted to be there. So I think knowing which page you are served our automated chat on and how that can help you is one of the most important things in the customer journey. Most of us don't begin our search for a home between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. because we got a million other things and work going on. And next point is demographics. Thinking about how and where our customers live and work. I think some changes brought about in the last 18 months that we've seen accelerated are multiple generations are sometimes living in the same house for a period of time or relatively close by. That's a choice. Children sometimes live further away from their aging parents. Younger generations are more diverse than ever. I am an elderly millennial at 40, but I know that Gen Z is right behind me and coming in fast in terms of being even more diverse than my generation. And I think build to rent, buying is not as feasible or desirable as it once was. So I think, thinking about technology from a 30,000 foot level and then to an execution level, I think putting the customer's needs first is very important. And then if you're not sure, engaging with them and asking them about what their needs are. How can we use predictive data, but how do we ensure that local businesses thrive? And something as simple as tree equity, how do we ensure that the communities that we build have a lot of trees, and then the greater community around them also has trees, because communities that have trees are healthier communities overall. Now, the fun part, just a couple learnings from ultra luxury that I think can be brought to any development, to any group of people, regardless of income level or product type. I think looking globally is a big thing. We look to Australia for affordability, for placemaking, for sustainability initiatives. We look to Africa for developments at large scale, infrastructure building, new types of building materials given climate change. And I think Asia does hospitality and service exceptionally well. A 5 or 6 star hotel is relatively unseen in the United States, but seen quite a bit in Asia. I think, final point on that is nomenclature is free. I always say you can call something a half bathroom. You can call it a powder room, but you can charge more for the powder room, but it only feels more elevated. It's the same thing. So how can we start using those words in properties for all people? I always say when using elevated words, don't use too many of them. And my final point is, in any development, a development team should be thinking about just something that really changed my mind. A current client of mine, when they look at their placemaking development, they don't say we're developing here. They say we're developing here and we're going to be a neighbor to the community. And that requires listening, that requires learning, that requires enhancing, not gentrification, supporting local businesses. And this idea, which we can go a bit more into in the Q&A, is placekeeping. How does this locale thrive?
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Meg. I really like that you're digging into, no longer making assumptions and really digging into the needs of the people that you guys are serving. So awesome. And Rhea, can you tell us a little bit about what you're up to over at Hickok? Cool.
Sure. I am so happy to be here, and thank you so much for inviting me. So I am with Hickok. I'm the lifestyle director, and I recently stepped into the role of director of trend casting. And we are a Washington, D.C. based design practice. And we are really dedicated to focusing on design for what's next and design that matters. And so, it's really in my heart to really talk about multifamily communities, of retail, hospitality. And I'm really excited to be here to talk about this topic. Next slide, please. Sorry, I'm not sure if the next slide.
Natalie, you're controlling the slides.
Yes, thank you, Natalie.
So to restart that.
I'm sure she's going to reshare them. This is Betsy.
Yeah.
She was just
Totally
having
fine.
a slight technical hiccup on her end. I'm sure she'll just relaunch the presentation in a minute. But thanks for your patience on that front.
Oh, sure. So, I can tell you what we've been working on. The breadth of what I work on is actually from the affordable space to the luxury space. So I work on projects that that go from the most underserved communities to people that are very much in the high net worth community. And a little bit about me, as I said, I'm the director of trend casting. It's a new role. So especially after these last 18 months, I'm really excited to have this opportunity to sort of meld design data and almost like the anthropological parts of design into this role. I'm the founder of Hickok Lifestyle, which we started the studio 10 years ago to focus on multifamily residential and hospitality spaces. Just fun facts. I love the Centre Pompidou because of how fun it was. My design role models were Jane Jacobs and Shigeru Ban. I'm very much like in the visionary ENFJ, Aries, Enneagram type 7. And in my non-design life, I parent tweens, so pray for me. I love to read YA, and I am an indoor plant fiend and organic community gardener. Just, I love to share a little bit and would love to hear, you know, a little bit about everybody else that's in the audience as well. Next slide, please. So again, as I said, I work on the realm from affordable to very high end, and, you know, just sharing a few sheets about some projects that we've been worked on. This is more of a mid-rise building. We are finding that mid-rise level community is very appealing to many people. It gives people that sense, I think, of that human scale, you know, that 5 levels and below. In my area, that's what we consider mid-rise. And this is a project in a very diverse area of Tysons. And we were really inspired by botanical forms. And when we talk about diversity, which I think is something that's really important to talk about in the realm of design and architecture, you know, this particular area, we looked at the demographics and it was 25% Asian and South Asian, plus with a particularly high contingent of Middle Eastern community members. And so we talked about like, oh, so what is culturally really important? Really important to have a lot of family gathering spaces. Apartment living is something that a lot of people are really comfortable with, and multi-generational living as well. So you would have the grandparents living in one wing of the apartment building, and you know, the newly married grandkids in the other realm, but on the weekends they'd all be hanging out in the clubroom space. So we were really interested in talking about community in this particular project, and that botanical aspect of it, bringing it the inside out. Next slide, please. And then this is on the other realm of the spectrum for Totten Square. This is more focused on workforce housing, which I would say is, it's, you know, the attainable level. Nothing was subsidized, it's all market rate. But it's really interesting that our key demographic here is teachers, firefighters, and police officers. And they are really excited about this idea of having this art house modern aspect, because they're working in a very dynamic environment, a little bit hectic in some of their work life. So to come home to this more calming but creative feeling. And, you know, I think that's one thing that we talk about a lot in our work is we always center the people first. And while we're really excited about design and the aesthetics of it, you have to really think about who is a particular person that is going to be living here, what inspires them, what keeps them creative, what, you know, not just work. I mean, we are all very dedicated and very ambitious, but, you know, how are they spending their downtime, and how are they spending time with family and friends? So making sure that you have beautiful outdoor spaces. I mean, especially in these last 18 months, we found that outdoor spaces connected to these clubroom spaces is a very healing environment and a really great way that people feel comfortable to get together. Next slide, please. And lastly, on the other realm of the spectrum, this is an example of a project that is more, I would say, in, you know, the $5 a foot to even $7 a foot realm, that is in a very downtown core area in Washington, D.C. called the Batley. And so the considerations are a little bit different. When we were designing the amenity spaces for there, we were really focused on making the amenity spaces very flexible for work. So that co-working aspect is incredibly important, especially because when you're living in more core downtown areas, the unit sizes, at least on the East Coast where we tend to work, tend to be a little bit smaller. So that amenity space has to be more generous. It has to have more spaces where people can, you know, really focus and be able to get out of their studio apartment, but still be in a place where they feel comfortable. They're proud to show off where they work and or where they live, because it's actually where they work now, especially in these times. So we did a lot of these like mini booths, almost like these Skype rooms. I happen to be in one of them myself in our new office. And we're really finding that being able to have these amenity spaces that don't necessarily look like an office, but feel very comfortable, but really support the way that you can work in a hybrid work environment have been very popular. So that's kind of what we're up to at Hickok Cole, and I'm super excited to talk about all the other realms with Meg and Ashley about everything that's going on in the world.
Thank you so much. Those are gorgeous, and we'll have to talk later about plants. I can talk a lot about that. But yeah, just a reminder to everybody that's tuning in right now. If you do have questions for Meg and Rhea, just type those into the chat box. We'll be monitoring that. But to kind of just start off the conversation, I guess kind of just going off of what Rhea was just talking about, as a society, we're undergoing a ton of change. The work anywhere is altering the makeup of communities across the country, and people are expecting more, awareness and sensitivity to issues such as diversity and inclusion. So how are you kind of evolving the language you use to set the right tone? Maybe Meg, do you want to start off?
Sure. I think one of the things I've had to learn in the past year is really, to ask myself and my clients the question of who is missing. That part of attainability is understanding who's not in the room. Typically, when we make development decisions, it's a group of us that are all experts, but our customers and our communities are not necessarily holding, with us hand in hand as we make those decisions. So, asking who's missing, then thinking through, any successful development that should be replicated should be relatively financially successful. I'm a big believer in triple bottom line success. So understanding what is our budget, what are our value engineering constraints, especially I advise heavily on the marketing sector. What are the decisions we have to make? How can we make those decisions the most effectively and efficiently using data? And then how do we use that to make the best decisions for the customer that will eventually use the space and the community that will eventually engage with the space?
Yeah, and I think kind of building upon what Meg said, one of the approaches, and I'll share a real life example where I think it's really important to have a beginner's mind when you start any design project. And while we are experts in the built environment, at the same time, you can get into a very slippery slope if you make assumptions about who you're designing for. And I can share this example of, I had a project in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is a beautiful city if anybody ever has a chance to travel there. And it was for a new luxury multifamily, and it was supposed to be geared. We were told the brief, the demographics were like, that young professional coming out of school, 23 to 28. And coming from a city that is full of young professionals, we were like, okay, we'll start the design. Does this look good? And luckily, the client made the investment into a focus group. And so we actually had the opportunity to focus group with a group of people who were some from Tulsa, some from other places. And it was so interesting because a 23-year-old in Tulsa is very different from a 23-year-old in New York or Philadelphia or DC. That 23-year-old is probably married, might be running a nonprofit plus have their day job. While, the 23-year-old in a Northeast city, they're going for it in their career, but they're probably in a different place in their life socially. So the design that we had created didn't really support what the aspirations in life were of the 23-year-old in Tulsa. And so we had the opportunity to kind of retool that. And so I share that story because I think it is really important to have that beginner's mind and not make assumptions about design, because even though it may have worked really well in one project, it's always good to give yourself the time to spend time with really talking about what the vision is and who you're going to be serving in that project.
I'd love to add a story. This reminded me of a development I worked on in San Francisco, and this is on the marketing side. We had a development that would traditionally skewed towards darker finishes, brass, dark wood, and we weren't necessarily sure who our demographic would end up being. And it turns out we had a high percentage of same-sex couples purchase residences in the building. Now, you could attribute that not to finishes, not to design, because they were all excellent, but to the fact that we didn't show people in our marketing materials. We didn't preemptively say this type of person, the thing that I detest the most, a woman in a ball gown holding a champagne glass, is the only type of person who can afford or live in this apartment. We let the buyers see themselves in the property, and they did. And I think the effectively was shown in the types of residents that eventually purchased.
Awesome, thanks for that. We talk a lot about the last 18 months. But even before the last 18 months, we were kind of seeing a shift in expectations, amongst home buyers and renters, even in the value of life, that their homes and their neighborhoods need to provide. So how has your approach to design evolved over the last few years, and kind of where are you finding inspiration? And maybe Rhea, you'd like to kick this one off.
Sure. I think this is one that has been really important, especially in these last 18 months. And we always talk, I think people are always striving before for like work-life balance. And the last 18 months have really made us have work-life integration, and in so many ways, whether it's your home is now a school, a place of worship, it's your restaurant, it's your gym, and your workplace. So I think that looking forward into that, we're really looking, because so many people now, and we're in this like hybrid work environment, are shifting into a different rhythm of life. So they will be spending more time in their home than they may have before. So having a secondary, like a home office or a home workplace, because, you know, depending on the kind of space that you have, it just might be a 24-inch work area, whereas other people will have like its own room. So depending on whether you're in a for sale product or a multifamily product, we're looking at those very differently. I think another thing that we really look at is access to the outdoors. As simple as like we're starting the design of some new buildings, and we were looking at how many Juliet balconies can we add onto this building versus just, you know, traditional terraces and balconies because of the cost. And the Juliet balcony in itself, you know, that provides somebody access to outdoors. They can open a window. They feel like they have more control. Because, you know, we also understand we have to work within the parameters of the budget of the project. So you can't necessarily always add balconies to traditional balconies to every product, but you can maybe make the investment in the Juliet balcony. And I think it's thinking about those things that make apartments and single family homes, like what are those touches that people are valuing now more, and so outside air, being able to go to the outside, and flexibility in space is really important.
Great.
And to build upon that, I think also what I do on the marketing side is work with developers to think about what are our customer and user journeys. You know, what is the 6 to 8 hour journey? I work here, I come into the office for a couple hours and maybe have lunch. What is the 12-hour journey? I spend pretty much all of my day here. I'm at work first, and then maybe I'll have a cocktail, I'll have dinner, and then I'll go home. And then what is more the almost not 18-hour, but slightly longer journey where I live, work, and play here? And how do we build a community that continues to thrive, and sort of placekeeping, this is where this concept comes up, continues to build upon that concept long after the development team has exited the development.
Great point. And I guess, how has health and wellness grown as a priority?
Yeah, I can jump in there. I think one thing that we're definitely finding is that we're always adding gyms, but now wellness has expanded to the more emotional aspects of health as well. We're adding more, I would say, you know, almost like mindfulness rooms, places where people can decompress. We're talking to people about, in one project we're adding a potting shed as an amenity, because gardening, I mean, you know, close to my heart, but it truly has become like an enormous lifetime hobby for people. So, you know, to bring that into an amenity space and really dedicate space to it versus just, you know, people in their apartments having to use their kitchen sink as a place to repot their plants. So, you know, that all taps into that idea of wellness not just being like a fitness thing. And that's super important as well. And we are finding that people are dedicating, and our clients are dedicating more real estate to the gyms and adding more features. And, you know, with the rise of being able to use your phone as your personal trainer and all of these really great interactive fitness apps, you know, we're really excited about the way gym design is going. And at the same time, people are realizing like, you can't always be connected digitally. And I do need to have like some kind of practice that I'm, you know, using my hands, my mind, my body in a way that isn't connected to a screen. And so I think those are really interesting opportunities in design in all of these communities.
I agree completely. You know, one of the most interesting amenities I saw recently was a typical vending machine, except this one was stocked with healthy salads and juices. And I think that's a part of wellness that it's just amazing to have in a multifamily community. I also think that mental health is so much, it's definitely a part of us as individuals, but as community too. I think one of the things I felt the most during the pandemic and still feel is lonely. I miss going out and seeing people and gathering and thinking through in developments, how can we build upon those community interactions and engagements so that people gather and they're able to interact with each other more.
I love that. I think, I guess part of a blessing of COVID is that I've really gotten to know my neighbors because we've kind of been forced to, but it's been lovely. And my 6-year-old daughter is out gardening with, our 4 closest neighbors and learning about tomatoes, and, it's been lovely. So just thinking about that in advance when building communities, I think is awesome. And I guess, sustainability, I'm going to bring it back to that for a second, and how a lot of younger buyers, especially in renters, are kind of placing added value on companies to adopt, sustainability practices and carbon neutrality strategies and things like that. So has that carbon neutrality become a priority for you and your clients yet, or are you having those kinds of conversations?
Actually, I was just having a conversation with a colleague this morning about that.
Awesome.
And that we are a firm that we've designed a number of net zero buildings, and we're part of the 2030 challenge. And one of our biggest clients, who is a multinational developer, has said that they are dedicated to converting their whole portfolio across the globe into carbon neutral. And a part of it is really interesting to talk about that, not only because it's like the right thing to do, but, from a business point of view, they're also feeling, I guess, pressure from basically the banks. The banks are saying that it's going to be a better long-term investment to have these kinds of properties that are taking resilience and sustainability into account. And also local jurisdictions, depending on where you live, are starting to stand up and take notice, because it also, for resilience as well. And we're seeing this all across the country, that having buildings that can withstand, certain kinds of natural events, but also are energy conserving, they're better for people, but they're also better for community. So we're just seeing it on so many realms, and it's exciting to see and be a part of that.
I'm seeing the same thing. One of my clients is the almost 100-acre Bronzeville lakefront in Chicago South Side, and we have aims to become one of the greenest developments in the world. Now, what does that mean and how does that get done? We're exploring things such as affordable electrification. We're exploring regenerative design. It's almost as if LEED has become the benchmark. If you're not LEED, then what are you? You have to be. But what is that next level of all of the elements coming together and supporting each other? If you have a data center, how do you repurpose the heat from the data center? These are questions that we're asking ourselves internally as we work through early planning and messaging to the community, because I think one thing that's really important to do from the marketing side is to simplify what the sustainability initiatives are. I'm an industry person, and I still struggle to fully understand affordable electrification. So I know that when I have to communicate that to my husband, to my neighbor, to my friend, I need to be able to do that in the simplest way, because I think consumers as a whole have a very deep desire to educate themselves about what they are investing in.
That's basically why Rise was created, exactly for that reason. The non-technical jargon, the easy to understand how to take these necessary steps, or why, maybe look at this insulation instead of this insulation, and learning about the different building standards and things, but in really easy to understand terms. So you're absolutely right. Consumers and homeowners are just, they want the education themselves. And I think this is great because we're kind of putting pressure from all sides. It's coming from the homeowners, but also coming from government and building standards and things like that. So we're getting there. We're going in the right direction for sure. Go for it, Meg.
I want to add something I saw. I wish I had this meme that I could pull up, but it was basically a ladder. There were 2 ladders. One ladder was no sustainability, total sustainability. And the other was a ladder where recycling and using wastewater, and you had all these steps. And I think getting the development community as large to understand that sustainability is not all or nothing, that you can take steps to get to that goal is important.
Completely agree.
Hey, Ashley.
Hey.
We have a lot of questions coming in. I can jump in and add them from the attendees.
Sure,
and we
go
can get
for
back
it.
to the feeder questions.
Yeah.
So we have one from 125 Outdoors. What thoughts do you have on trends such as smaller homes, pre or post children consumer types, or trends such as remote first workforce, or the idea of live, work, play anywhere lifestyle?
I guess I could take that but to start. I could try to take a stab at that. There's a lot to unpack there. I think definitely, you know, being based in a practice that is in a city, people have always talked about, oh my gosh, the cities are dying, everyone's moving out. And we've seen, like, in the last 18 months, there has been a migration. And at the same time, you're seeing people come back. And I think one thing that is very interesting, like demographically, like cities are always going to draw young, very young people out of school because of the opportunities for work, for experience. And then as you know, have different seasons of your life, there's still going to be a need for, especially housing that can accommodate young families. And what we are seeing also is that multi-generational housing is incredibly important. And when you look at the demographic trends of baby boomers who are retiring, and yet they're retiring and they are living longer. And also you have millennials and Gen Xers who are in sort of that realm of, having families, and they want to be near each other. And how do you take care? And people, and at the same time, no one wants to put their elders into retirement homes anymore. So there is an opportunity for these kinds of products to have this multi-generational housing that gives people independence and at the same time proximity. And I know that we've been looking at doing studies on a number of different ways that we can do this in more like an urban suburban environment. And I would love to talk with others like in this community about, you know, what they're seeing across the country too, because I think it's going to take a lot of all of our great minds coming together to talk about how we're shifting in society that way.
Thank you.
I love that. And, you know, I think this idea of the 15-minute city has really been explored to where it's becoming more of a customer focused idea versus before it was just kind of a high level, you know, big thinking concept. And to build upon Rhea's, you know, ideas, flexible spaces, right? So it's definitely smaller spaces, but smaller spaces that can be utilized in different ways. And when she spoke about that development that had those Zoom rooms or these pods, you don't necessarily need a huge amenity. You just need it to be small and efficient and be somewhere that you can escape to or just work in.
Thanks. The next question is from Blair, who was a facilitator at during our last panel. This one's for you, Meg. She asks if your company, Butterfly Voyage, has looked into WELL or the Living Building Institute as we moved on to the next standard after LEED that better serves our communities and the environment.
Absolutely. So one of the collaborators working with our team on Bronzeville Lakefront is Jason F Mclennan of Mclennan Design, who is kind of the grandfather of the Living Building Challenge. So I'm learning so much from him about biophilic design and regenerative design, and really how do we not only build a community, landscape architecture, buildings, but infrastructure to support all of those things to ensure that they thrive. But, you know, I would also say, Blair, one of the things that I'm learning too is what Rhea said early on is we have to be open to unlearning and saying we don't know. I think the Living Building Challenge and even carbon, was it by the 2030 challenge is still evolving as we try to achieve it. So we just need to keep going.
And then one last question from Karen Benner. Flexible spaces are enhanced by flexible furniture. Have you partnered with any furniture maker or provider to add this element to the consumer purchase?
So that's a really interesting question. I worked in a project where we were designing, and this is for sale condos, and they were what we were calling micro condos because the smallest one was 325 square feet. So basically around the size of like a king suite in a hotel. And the 2 bedrooms were all under 600 square feet. But they were at priced at a price point that made them very affordable. So they were priced in like the $800 to $1,000 a square foot for our particular market, you know, and that's what's really important is that the only way that anyone could see living in these was when we partnered with we worked with a custom builder, but they built in like Murphy beds to show how the 325 square foot unit could actually be livable. And those went the fastest, because I think when you looked at it in plan and you looked at like, you know, a little small box, people were like, I don't know how I could possibly live in it. But the only way we could make that kind of sales value really apparent was by staging it and having these flexible Murphy beds that also converted into a desk and also had storage integrated. So I think it's like when you're working in that realm of small space living, it is absolutely important to have really great partners who can show how you can live and work in a really efficient space.
Agreed. I was thinking about Ori, which is sort of the robotic furniture company. And I think what's been really interesting to see is the design for modular furniture. And this has just evolved so much in a good way in the last 18 months. I think it's going to get better.
Cool. Was that it for questions for now, Natalie?
It is, thanks.
Cool. I love it. Keep them coming. But I've got kind of just one more, I think, to get you guys thinking, kind of about failing forward. You know, sometimes failure teaches us more than success. So are there any fail forwards you've experienced over the last few years that have changed the way you design and kind of communicate your value proposition? Who wants to go first? Okay, go for it.
I'll go. I would say it's the most interesting thing is it's the reason I started my company. And I sat there and thought about, okay, what do I want to do? I've stayed home with my daughter and consulted the first few years. When she turned 3, I returned to work full time. So do I want to fall into a traditional marketing role, or do I want to try to bring something to the industry that includes diversity, that includes bringing practices from luxury to all people? And I didn't have a plan. And I think I had to fail in that to say that, how do I create the job I want? How do I bring learnings? How do I build a bridge between real estate and technology? And how do I build better places for people? And, you know, I would say I'm still failing forward. You know, I've got the business is about 1.5 years old. It's doing very well. We work with Sidewalk Labs, we work with Bronzeville, we work with developers. But how does that continue to build upon itself? And what does it eventually look like?
Love it.
Yeah. And I would say, so I wish I could fail faster. That sounds like a weird thing to say, but sometimes, especially working in this space of working with like larger buildings, you can literally be working on a building for 5 years. So we're somewhat doing things like fortune telling and trying to figure out how the person 5 years from now is going to be living. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And generally, you know, we've been pretty lucky, like knock on like wood, that most of the things that we've come up with as far as like, I remember one thing that we did was like, we started putting onto gyms, operable partitions that open up onto the outside. And this is before the last 18 months happened, right? And it was more of an experiment. And it was more actually because we didn't have enough space inside the multi-purpose room. So we're like, hey, but you have this great terrace. Why don't we just like utilize that? And it could have gone really wrong because it was really expensive and the client could have been really unhappy. But, you know, this last era that we've been in, it's been the most popular amenity. But it took us 4 years to learn that lesson. So I think that, you know, I think one thing is, and I think it comes back to like that product type also, is finding those kinds of products from a housing point of view that are more of that small to mid-range, that let us experiment a little bit more, let us like push the boundaries on maybe that missing middle component, maybe the multi-generational housing, because I know that it's such a big investment to do buildings. And that 5-year investment, that means that we're not all able to push those boundaries as much as we like, because there's a certain amount of risk that you have to take. But if you have a smaller project, sometimes you have that chance, like if it's 5 units, or 20 units, is different from having 400 units. So I'd like to fail faster a little bit.
Thank you. We have a few more questions coming in. We have about 10 to 15 more minutes left for the session. So Betsy asked, can you talk a little bit more about messaging? Beyond not including people in photos, what else do you do to make people feel welcome or included?
I think I'll jump in with that one. That's a really great question because we're still learning what that looks and feels like. But I would say, some of the baseline things that I do are, respect the place that you're building in. Don't walk in there with assumptions, get to know the place. Don't rename the neighborhood, something that makes no sense at all. Be thoughtful about what you call things and how you use your words, So really one of the foundational elements is listening. Get to know the people if there are people there, and talk to them as people, not as a developer to a community member, but as a human being to another human being. Learn, get to know the place. I know it's harder to visit places these days. I took my first trip for Bronzeville to Chicago about a week and a half ago, but walking a neighborhood, there's no substitute. But when you can't walk a neighborhood, make sure you go on Google Street View and navigate through and pretend you're taking the bus and do all of those things. And I go back to enhance a community, don't gentrify it. That is how you make people feel welcome, by not walking in there and saying, we're going to take this, which is not that great, we're going to make it so much better. Well, what about the people that were living there for the last 50 years? What are you saying about the place that they've called home or they've lived, worked, and played in? So really thinking about how can we make this better? If you are building Class A office space, then find a way to ensure that people who cannot necessarily afford that level of office space can still have their coffee shop or wine bar or local gathering place or barber shop there. So, thinking about how do we showcase local businesses? I think when it comes to messaging, too often we talk about ourselves and our product before we talk about the people that were there. So really showcasing the local community and talking about them first is really important, especially when it comes to social media. And, I think that, the core foundational element is when you are listening, do not be afraid to question or to unlearn. And I'll give a personal anecdote. I was talking to someone about a couple months ago, and I said, and I could tell she was LGBTQ, but I didn't necessarily know the right thing to ask. So I asked her, how do you ask someone about their preferred pronouns? And what she said was, you do not say preferred pronouns, you just say, what are your pronouns? Because announcing that it's preferred means that preference is an option. And I didn't know that, but I wasn't afraid to ask. And I did have to unlearn.
Thanks. And how does attainability influence the way you think about the design and how you communicate what you offer?
I think attainability, this is such a big topic, especially because of, while we are like in one of the most affluent eras of our country, there's also a lot of people who are, really having a hard time making it. And so thinking about attainability, I worked on a project recently that did deliver, in the last 18 months, and it was more focused on the affordable space, and it was subsidized, and it was 250 units. And in the first day they opened the lottery, there were 1,000 people on the wait list. And so when you think about the need, there's a big spectrum from the very low income to people who are not necessarily needing support, from a government way, but they're still, they're the Uber driver they're the person working at Amazon warehouse and doing an Uber driver, and they're also supporting, their family who might be in this country or abroad. And I also think about the person, the person who just graduated from college who has $30,000 in school loans. So attainability is a really important thing to think about, because it's going to be at different spectrums and different people at different parts of their lives. So I think from a design point of view, we like to really make sure that no matter what price point you are living in a beautiful place that you are proud of. And so when you will sometimes look at our portfolio, you will not know that the demographic of who lives there might be someone who is, at 80% AMI versus the person who is, making in the six figures in the tech industry in another project. So I think thinking about that, like democratizing design in that way is super important, and that you can make sure that it is a beautiful place for someone to live at any price point. And I think we're really dedicated to that in our practice.
And when it comes to communication, actually actively soliciting people's input, regardless of the design, product, or level of price point, is really important. We are at a time when there's crowdsourcing, there are surveys, you can get a survey by text, you can engage on Instagram. So there are people out there who want to be heard. It's our job to engage with them, to build developments and communities that they will want, they feel like they are included in. And, I say this having just moved to Nashville from San Francisco. I'm originally from New York, but one of the hardest things to make happen in San Francisco was that your child's preschool teacher could afford to live in a place close to where they worked and not have a ridiculous commute. And now that I'm in Nashville, as I will start to advise developers here, I start thinking about that. If we have this beautiful coffee shop or this wine bar or this preschool, the people that work in these places and service the residents need to be able to have a happy life too. And how do we plan for that? Because the only way you can do it is to really financially plan for it and then start to execute and message that out.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely, getting a little bit into the wonky kind of realm, but the inclusionary zoning is incredibly important, because to be able to have childcare workers, teachers, firefighters, police officers, hospitality workers live close to where they work is incredibly important. And we see that in this particular area, but you see it all across the country, because if you're only making, $6 an hour plus tips, depending on what state you live in, it's really tough to say, hey, I'm going to live in the core downtown part right next to my restaurant who's my employer. So I think this is, again, a bigger issue that all of us need to be talking about, because a society that only has like one certain kind of person at one certain kind of level of education, one certain kind of income level, is not a very interesting culture. And we've all been there. Like, they're kind of boring places. Great places are places where there's a lot of different kinds of people with a lot of different ideas and a lot of interesting things happening. And I think that's what we're all dedicated to.
Thanks. As we wrap up, I just want to ask one final question. A lot of our network, or 50% of our network, are production home builders. And so for those people that work in the production home building positions and they're listening to this, what would be 2 tips that you could give them from their point of view that they could walk away with today and improve their business?
I would definitely say that in your consumer is design. I think people have really realized this too in the last 18 months, that design is really interesting. And so, like, giving them more options in that production home building space, if it's a for sale product, is really will be something that's going to be really appealing. And then on the apartment side space too, being able to have that individuality and like being able to customize your living space a little bit, whether that's in the closet, whether that's you're adding a some people might value having a workspace versus a place to hang their bike. I think providing those customizations is really important. And second, I think really provide opportunities for people to come together. I think that's the thing that this past, most recent time has really, is like the values. People are really valuing being able to come together with friends and family. And while people love having like their own home, those communal spaces where you can meet other people and you can be with people that you love and you enjoy their company are really important. So whether that's in your master plan or whether that's in your apartment building or whether that's in your condo building, really, I'm hoping that you can dedicate some more space to that people can come together.
My 2 takeaways, and this is really interesting. The first one would be we did our businesses and work from our armchairs. Is look globally for inspiration. Look for inspiration when it comes to materiality, paints that don't off gas, service offerings, the types of uniforms. How does the property management staff interact with the community, so that not only do you have your first round of customers, they become your customers for life. So, when I say look globally, I mean in terms of place, but I also mean in terms of technology. Don't be afraid of technology. It's coming and it's here, but the ones who embrace it faster will ultimately do better in the long run. And I would say my second point, it's a little bit more emotional, but it's think about how your community, even if it's 300 homes and they're all clustered together, how can they be a good neighbor to the greater community that surrounds them? It doesn't necessarily have to be a perfect description of the 15-minute city. It can be a 20-minute city. But how does this place you are building with this group of homes enhance everything else that surrounds it?
Thank you so much. We're going to move on soon to the next session, but I wanted to thank Ashley and Meg and Rhea for all of your insights, and Ashley for facilitating today.